All right, so this is lesson 101, Paul's shipwreck. Okay, Acts 27. So we left off in King Agrippa, and Festus said, well, if he hadn't appealed to Caesar, we could have let him go. But he's appealed to Caesar he must go. Once you appeal to Caesar, you can't turn back. Okay? So let's see what happens here then after that. Chapter 27, verse 1. And when it was determined that we should sail into Italy, they delivered Paul and certain other prisoners, so Paul's not the only prisoner on here, unto one named Julius, a centurion of Augustus's band. So this must have been a very important man who was obviously a centurion. So we might think, well, no different than the other centurions, but he's a centurion of Augustus's, so Caesar Augustus's band. So he's trusted either with the worst criminals that need to go to Rome or with those closest to him, maybe kind of like the Secret Service. But this is a man who's trusted by Augustus, okay? Julius. So probably a pretty powerful man, maybe a level-headed, hopefully guy. Verse 2, and entering into a ship of Adramyttium, we launched, meaning to sail by the coasts of Asia. So they wanted to go up north, along the northern coasts, okay? North of the island of Cyprus. One Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, being with us. And the next day we touched at Sidon, and Julius courteously entreated Paul and gave him liberty to go unto his friends to refresh himself. So he let Paul visit with his friends here in Sidon. Whether there was a guard with him attached to him all the time or what, but Paul was given a courtesy there. So we can see this Julius man, probably just like the chief ruler in Herod's jail, Saul and Joseph, something important, and just as was seen in Daniel, something godly that brought him forth, so Julius probably saw that in Paul here and gives him privileges. Verse 4, and when we had launched from thence, so they leave Sidon, we sailed under Cyprus because the winds were contrary. So then they sail below the island of Cyprus because the winds are coming in a particular direction, and the island will protect them from those winds. And when we had sailed over the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. And there the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing into Italy, and he put us on therein. So they get off of one ship here in Myra and aboard another ship that had sailed north from Alexandria, which is in Egypt, filled with, later on we see, grain, and it was heading probably to bring grain to Rome for the people there. So that's the new ship that they get on. Okay? Julius stays with him. And when we had sailed slowly many days, the wind was not suffering us, and we sailed under Crete over against Salmone, and hardly passing it, came unto a place which is called the Fair Havens, which most of you labeled on your map there, nigh whereunto was the city of Lasea. Now when much time was spent, and when sailing was now dangerous, because the fast was now already past, Paul admonished them. So it's a time of year when storms are coming. Okay? It's a dangerous time of year. We don't worry in the spring. Now we worry about thunderstorms, and it's a good time for tornadoes. And the fall is a good time. But for us to say, I'm not going to travel to Oklahoma because of a tornado, we probably wouldn't do that. But if we lived in the Philippines or, say, Singapore when it's the monsoon season, you know you're going to get huge downpours of rain, and it could be dangerous to maybe be traveling in the mountains or on the seas. You might say, we're going to hold off for this season. We're done. Okay, or you went up to Alaska and you were fishing there. We know the storms come. There's a good window to be out there, and there's a bad time to be out there. Okay, and that is here. It's the bad time to be sailing. Most smart sailors would park their ships for the winter season, stay in the port until the season was done for a few months, and then head on. But we'll see what's the case here. Verse 10. So here Paul is speaking to the ship captain and to Julius. And he said unto them, Sirs, I perceive that this voyage will be with hurt and much damage, not only of the lading and ship, but also of our lives. Nevertheless, the centurion believed the master and the owner of the ship more than those things which were spoken by Paul. So Julius sticks with the owner, not with Paul. And because the haven was not commodious to winter in, so they thought, well, this city here is not the best place. We could find a better one. And the more part advised to depart thence also, if by any means they might attain unto Phenice, and there to winter, which is in haven of Crete. and lieth towards the southwest and northwest. And when the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, loosing thence, they sailed close by Crete. So they think, look, we've even got good fortune here. The winds are very favorable to us. How nice it is. But not long after there arose it a tempestuous one called Euroclydon. And when the ship was caught and could not bear up into the wind, we let her drive. So in other words, they couldn't fight the winds anymore. Where the winds will push us, that's where we're going to go. We'll put the sails up or down, depending on where we go. We cannot fight this tempestuous wind. And running under a certain island, which is called Clauda, we had much work to come by the boat. And when they had taken up, they used helps undergirding the ship. So here, they've got a little window of opportunity because they're on the other side of an island where there's a little bit of calm seas. Let's strap ropes under the boat to help hold it together so it doesn't twist and crack apart and break. Okay? And also then they see they're undergirding the ship and fearing lest they should fall into the quicksands, strake sail, and were so driven. So they did some other things to avoid some sandbars probably. And we being exceedingly tossed with a tempest, the next day they lightened the ship. What does it mean to lighten the ship? Garrett? Yeah, if there's stuff, a lot of ships would have sandbags holding over the side. Just things to add some ballast. Well, they started pitching that stuff to keep the boat as high in the water as they could. Because if it's low in the water and it starts tipping, if it gets low enough, one of the sides will catch water onto the deck and it'll begin taking on water. So keep that boat as high as it can be. It's going to really be nasty back and forth, but at least it will stay upright. Okay, so they toss everything that's worthless overboard. And the third day we cast out with our own hands the tackling of the ship. So things that, they're throwing everything here. And when neither sun nor stars in many days appeared and no small tempest lay on us, all hope that we should be saved was then taken away. But after long abstinence, Paul stood forth in the midst of them and said, Sirs, ye should have hearkened unto me, and not have loosed from Crete, and to have gained this harm and loss. Paul doesn't say that here to poke them, say, see, I told you so. But he's saying this because what he's going to say next. He's saying, gentlemen, I know God's will. Okay? Or in some way, I know what we should have done. You should have listened to my wisdom. You didn't listen the first time. So here's my next bit of advice. Please listen to it. Okay? So here's his next bit of advice. And now I exhort you to be of good cheer, for there shall be no loss of any man's life among you, but of the ship. So the ship will be destroyed, but none of you will die. For there stood by me this night the angel of God, whose I am, and whom I serve, saying, Fear not, Paul, thou must be brought before Caesar, and lo, God hath given thee all them that sail with me. So God has told Paul, he said explicitly, Paul, you and everyone with you will live. Wherefore, sirs, be of good cheer, for I believe God, that it shall be even as it was told me. Howbeit we must be cast upon a certain island. So we're going to be shipwrecked, we're going to be stuck on an island, but we're all going to live. And when the 14th night was come, as we were driven up and down in Adria, about midnight, the shipmen deemed that they drew near to some country. So they're getting too close to the shore, and they're afraid of crashing into the rocks. And sounded, which means they would have taken a heavy weight on a rope and let it go, goes all the way down, and then pull it back up, and they would tie knots like every 3 feet or something to figure out how deep is it, okay? So they sounded and found it 20 fathoms. And when they had gone a little further, they sounded again and found it 15 fathoms. So they're getting in shallower and shallower water. Then lest, fearing we should have fallen upon rocks, they cast 4 anchors out of the stern and wished for the day. So they threw out the anchors to hold the boat in place, but now that means the waves are going to crash against the ship and start potentially breaking it apart because it's stuck in place. Whereas before, at least it would ride the waves. Now the waves are crashing against it because it's moored in place. And as the shipmen were about to flee out of the ship, when they had let down the boat into the sea, so they let out the lifeboat, right? They have a lifeboat in there. So some of the men threw the lifeboat, and they wanted to get in that lifeboat. Okay? Under color as though they would have cast anchors out of the foreship, Paul said to the centurion, to Julius, and to the soldiers, except these abide in the ship, ye cannot be saved. So if you don't make these guys stay here, we're all going to die. God said, we all have to stick together in order to live. Okay? So then what did the soldiers do? Verse 32, the soldiers cut off the ropes of the boat and let her fall off. So they cut off the ropes that held the small ship on there, okay, so that they could escape. They let it go into the waves so no one could escape anymore. And while the day was coming on, Paul besought them to all take meat, saying, This day is the 14th day that ye have tarried and continued fasting, having taken nothing. Wherefore I pray you to take some meat, for this is for your health. In other words, you haven't eaten for a long time. We're about to be shipwrecked. Eat now so you have some strength to make it to the shore. Okay? For there shall not a hair fall from the head of any of you. And when he had thus spoke, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of them all. And when he had broken it, he began to eat. And were they all of good cheer, and they also took some meat. And were in all the ship 260 souls, so 276. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, so threw more stuff, and cast out the wheat into the sea. So before they had cast off tackling and weights and anything else, now they're willing to even throw the grain into the sea. Okay, the grain was their money. Now the ship is worth nothing. And when it was day, they knew not the land, so they didn't recognize where they were. But they discovered a certain creek with a shore into which they were minded, if it were possible, to thrust in the ship. And when they had taken up the anchors, they committed themselves unto the sea, and loosed the rudder bands, and hoisted up the mainsail to the wind, and made toward shore. So they're going for broke here. They pull up the anchors, throw up the sail, and hope the wind drives them into this creek, which goes into the land. Maybe it will be safe in there. And falling into a place where two seas met, so the water is probably moving a lot of sand. It creates shallow spots. The waves are crashing into each other. Two seas meet. They ran the ship aground, and the forepart stuck fast and remained unmovable. But the hinder part was broken the violence of the waves. So the front of the ship was stuck on sand. The back part was just jumping around like a bucking horse, you can imagine, up and down with each wave, and a boat can't take that. Eventually it's going to crack apart, and that's what it did. Okay? But the hinder part was broken with the violence of the waves. And the soldiers' counsel was to kill the prisoners. They told the centurion, let's kill all these guys before lest any of them should swim out and escape. Maybe they'll swim out of here, get to the island, and they'll run away. But the centurion, willing to save Paul, kept them from their purpose, and commanded that they which could swim should cast themselves first into the sea and get to land. If you can swim, jump overboard and get to land. And the rest, some on boards and some on broken pieces of the ship. And so it came to pass that they escaped all safe to land. So all of the soldiers, all of the prisoners, all of the sailors, every single one of them, what Paul had said happened. They all made it safely to land. God's hand was guiding them. He protected them because Paul needs to get to Rome, but not just Paul, but because these men were with Paul, they also were saved from a sure death in this tempestuous sea. Okay? So we see how God is bringing there, and we'll see then in the next lesson what happens on that island. They're going to be there for about 3 months. So what does Paul do? Obviously he's going to preach and teach, and then eventually he makes it to Rome. And what is Paul's end once he hits Rome? What happens to him after that? Okay? We'll see that in the next lesson.